East African history. The Hehe Rebellion. Chief Mkwawa'S resistance 1890-1898. The Hehe Rebellion / Chief Mkwawa'S resistance 1890-1898. The Hehe Rebellion was the first major uprising that took place on mainland Tanganyika against German rule. The rebellion took place in southern Tanganyika. It was spearheaded by Chief Mkwawa, who had come to power in 1878. The major cause of the war was Chief Mkwawa'S refusal to give up on trading activities as he had been instructed by the German colonialists. Causes of the rebellion. Chief Mkwawa wanted to maintain the independence of his people, which the Germans had eroded. He didn't want his people to be under foreign rule. The Hehe under Mkwawa had built a strong army due to their participation in trade with the Arabs, to which they got guns, and they thought that they could humiliate the German forces. Mkwawa levied a heavy home tax on the caravans that passed through his area, and when the Germans requested him to stop the tax, he refused, and this led to war with the Germans. When German traders refused to pay tax to Mkwawa, he angrily reacted by closing the trade routes and imprisoning many traders at Usagara, which annoyed the Germans. The Hehe also resisted because the Germans had grabbed a lot of Hehe lands to introduce plantation farming. The Germans were always interrupting Mkwawa'S aggressive expansionist raids against his neighbours, and this brought into clashes with the Germans, who were also spreading their rule. Mkwawa was also annoyed with German disrespect for him, e.g., they called him backward and uncivilized, yet he was a sovereign ruler over Hehe. Mkwawa also claimed to be the sole controller of the central long-distance trade route Tabora Bagamoyo, which the Germans were also claiming, and this resulted into war. Forced labour on European farms. Public works like roads also forced Mkwawa to mobilize his people to rebel against German rule. Mkwawa'S diplomatic envoys' messengers were on several occasions gunned down by the Germans, forcing him to angrily retaliate by engaging them in warfare. East African history. The Hehe Rebellion. Chief Mkwawa'S resistance 1890-1898. The Hehe were also known to be warmongers, and they took a lot of pride in fighting, and that is why they revolted against the Germans. Mkwawa'S character also led to the outbreak of the revolt, i.e., he was big-headed and unpredictable. E.g., when he imprisoned the German traders for not paying tax, the Germans requested him to release them, but he refused, and this annoyed the Germans. The Hehe also expected support from Chief Chapram of the Ngoni and Chief Siki of Tabora, and this gave them courage to fight against the Germans. Course of the Hehe Rebellion. Chief Mkwawa came to power in 1878 after succeeding his father Manakamba. He built a strong army which he used to stage a prolonged resistance against the Germans in southern Tanganyika. From 1880, Mkwawa was busy expanding his borders of his empire. It landed him into trouble with the Germans, who were busy expanding their rule in Tanganyika. In his bid to control the trade, Mkwawa closed the Tabora Bagamoyo trade route. He also imprisoned German and Swahili traders for refusing to pay hongo tax/tribute. Mkwawa was on several occasions requested by the Germans to release the traders he had imprisoned, but he refused, and this arrogance annoyed the Germans, who reacted with force. Mkwawa'S behaviour was also based on the assumption that he was to get support from Chief Chapram of the Ngoni and Chief Siki of Tabora. In 1891, a German force under Ulekis confronted Mkwawa for the first time. However, he learned of this plot, and he ambushed and humiliated the German force at Longola. He killed many Germans and their commander, Ulekis. The Germans temporarily accepted defeat, and they turned their attention to Chief Siki of the Nyamwezi, who was willing to collaborate and work with them. Mkwawa later realized the need for a peaceful end to the conflict. He sent messengers with gifts to the Germans, and they responded by gunning down Mkwawa'S messengers. Mkwawa was greatly annoyed by this act, and he responded by closing the caravan trade route. East African history. The Hehe Rebellion. Chief Mkwawa'S resistance 1890-1898. But Mkwawa was not to give up on his peaceful plans to end the conflict. He therefore sent another messenger to the Germans with gifts, but he was also killed. This greatly demoralized Mkwawa, who engaged the Germans in full-scale war at Kilisa. He managed to kill 290 Germans and their allies. In October 1892, he destroyed a long-distance caravan at Kondo, which increased his influence in the region. Mkwawa was also able to complete the construction of his fort at Kalinga. In 1894, the Germans decided to deal decisively with Mkwawa, and they stormed and destroyed his capital at Kalinga, killing many of his soldiers. With a handful of his men, Mkwawa escaped to Ngonchwe and unsuccessfully attempted to ambush the Germans on their way back to the coast. After this, the Germans relaxed their machinery against Mkwawa, thinking that this had completely weakened him, but they were mistaken. Mkwawa started using a guerrilla war tactic, hit and run to launch attacks on German-controlled areas. This also forced the Germans to adopt the scorched earth policy. The Germans destroyed water and food reservoirs, which caused widespread hunger and starvation. Between 1895 and 1898, Mkwawa suffered heavy losses as his warriors were killed. After sensing defeat, Mkwawa refused to be captured alive and instead shot himself in 1898. A few of his trusted soldiers also surrendered to the Germans. When the Germans found his body, they cut off his head and sent it to a museum in Berlin, Germany, and this marked the end of the Hehe resistance against the Germans. Reasons for Mkwawa'S defeat: military superiority of the Germans compared to Mkwawa'S outdated guns. Lack of support from neighbouring societies, e.g., the Sangre chief always spied on Chief Mkwawa. The Germans always received massive support from their home gov, e.g., weapons, medicine. He had a poor economy that could not sustain the prolonged resistance. Lack of proper planning, e.g., no battle plans were made. East African history: the Hehe rebellion chief Mkwawa'S resistance 1890-1898. Mkwawa lacked advisors, e.g., he should have released the German traders who had not paid Hongo tax. German brutality also scared some of Mkwawa'S forces and they surrendered. The long periods of drought and diseases also weakened the Hehe. By the time of his death, Mkwawa was sickly, and this also led to the defeat against the Germans. The Germans' determination to completely discipline Mkwawa led to his defeat. Mkwawa made a mistake of constructing a fort at Kalinga, and this made it easy for the Germans to ambush his strongest point of defense. Mkwawa had also neglected other areas in the Hehe region and was only concentrating on his capital at Kalinga, and this made it easy for the Germans to defeat areas beyond the capital. Mkwawa had been cut off from the Arab supply of arms, which also weakened his army. Finally, the death of Mkwawa left his forces with low morale for fighting, and many surrendered to the Germans afterwards. Effects of the Hehe rebellion: the Hehe were defeated by the Germans and they lost their independence. Many people were killed, e.g. at Kilasa, Mkwawa killed 290 Germans and their allies. The death of people resulted into massive depopulation in southern Tanganyika. The rebellion caused a lot of misery, suffering, which forced some people to migrate to safer areas. There was destruction of property, e.g. villages, food stores, especially when the Germans used the scorched earth policy. Famine set in because people had neglected agriculture to fight the Germans. After the war, the Germans became more cruel and brutal to Africans, which increased suffering. Trade was disrupted, especially along the central trade routes in Nyamwezi land and Hehe land, due to Mkwawa'S anti-German campaigns. The Hehe learned a lesson that in future they should not bother resisting the Germans because they were superior, e.g. during Maji Maji Rebellion 1905-1907, the Hehe didn't participate. East African history: the Hehe Rebellion chief Mkwawa'S resistance 1890-1898.